4 to 9.
I propose to take questions 4 to 9 together.
Agreed.
I spoke by telephone with Chancellor Merkel on Thursday, the 3rd of July. The main focus of our discussion was my attendance at the CSU meeting in Bavaria, but the main focus turned out to be about Brexit and the importance of the withdrawal agreement that was agreed between the EU and the UK last November being ratified. We agreed that while we would be ready to offer additional reassurances and clarifications to the United Kingdom, there could be no renegotiation or contradiction of the withdrawal agreement, including on the backstop. We reiterated our commitment to starting negotiations on the future relationship as soon as possible after the United Kingdom's withdrawal, and our wish for that relationship to be as close, comprehensive and ambitious as the United Kingdom wants it to be. We also discussed our work on preparedness, including contingency planning for a no-deal scenario, recognising the closer that we get to the 29th of March, without ratification of the withdrawal agreement, the more urgent the work becomes. I expect to speak or meet with Chancellor Merkel again later this week.
As tabled, Deputy Burton, 1 minute, please.
Thank you for that, Taoiseach. Just want to ask you if you and Mrs Merkel have had any discussion in relation to the possible time extension of Article 50 and the withdrawal mechanism, because in terms of the, I think the requirements of, as it were, England's unwritten constitution or the UK's unwritten constitution, I think a lot of time is needed now to put into effect any of the different options which appear to be being canvassed by Mrs May at the moment as potentials. I think she changes from time to time as to what the top potential is. But let's say if, for instance, there were to be something like a Norway-style deal or some kind of EFTA arrangement, which wouldn't be the full previously offered withdrawal agreement that you referenced, what do you think would be the timeline that might be required to do that and to effect the necessary legislation in the UK to allow it to happen? And would you therefore support, if that came on the table, would people like the Germans support an extension of the time on Article 50?
Deputy by Barrett, 1 minute.
Taoiseach, the comments by Margarita Shyness from the European Commission to the effect that Ireland will see a new hard border if Britain fails to approve the Brexit withdrawal agreement are extremely alarming and would suggest maybe that the mask of EU solidarity with Ireland over preventing a hard border on this island is slipping a bit. And equally worrying, Simon Coveney has again said today that without the withdrawal agreement, it'll be difficult to stop a hard border. Now, I would really like you to explain these comments, Taoiseach. Who is going to put up this border? What does that mean? If the agreement, and the agreement would seem to be a bit of a dead letter at the moment, but surely we have to make it absolutely clear to Theresa May and to the European Union that under any circumstances, deal, no deal, whatever, we're not accepting a border. So I'd just like to know, what discussion have you had with Angela Merkel, with the EU Commission, with any of the EU leaders about these suggestions that somehow a border is going to erect itself in the case of a no deal?
Deputy McDonald, is 1 minute.
Same issue last Count Curlick. I think it's important just to clarify that you can't, we can't wish a border away. I said to you, Taoiseach, as a matter of simple logic, we seek the backstop to avoid a hardening of the border. Therefore, logically, as a matter of simple logic, if you don't have the backstop, the border hardens. And it's not just a case of saying, well, we're not doing it, because it's not just about infrastructure. It's about standards, it's about regulations, it's about customs, it's about tariffs. And if the border hardens, the international rules kick in. That's how it is. Now, I'm saying this as I'm not any flag bearer for the European Union, but we need to deal with the facts, because the jeopardy that presents is very, very dangerous indeed. And actually, I take the view that the remedy for this must lie, firstly, with the British. They need to come up with the goods that honours their pledge not to undermine Good Friday, not to see a hardening of the border, and. They may not do that. We may have a crash. And in those circumstances, Taoiseach, you could do worse than discuss with Mrs Merkel and our German colleagues the whole experience of German reunification. And I want to put it to you again, for the umpteenth time, that in the event of a crash and a hardening of the border, which we cannot wish away or shout away, there will be an obligation on any government in Dublin worthy of the name to prepare for constitutional change. In other words, to ask Count Corla on this final, if you cannot mitigate the border, if you cannot avoid the worst excesses of the damage of Brexit, well, then you have to move to remove the border democratically, peacefully, by discussion, by consensus ideally, and that's why you should really establish a forum on unity, and you should talk to our German friends for guidance in that regard.
Deputy Brendan Howland has 1 minute.
Well, I'll take the same.
You didn't actually, because the clock ran on.
I said I'll take the same time as everybody else so far.
I know, but we'll deal with that.
I want to ask a very direct question of the Taoiseach, because I think the Taoiseach has been very forthright in many of his utterances in the last couple of weeks when he said that it is not enough to simply say we won't have a hard border, that you have to have a legal basis to implement those words. They're meaningless just as a throwaway remark. So can I ask you to be clear and frank with the Dáil now? In the event of a no-deal Brexit, what is your arrangement? What is your agreement with Angela Merkel and all your EU colleagues? Do you have an understanding about how the EU frontier, the single market frontier, and the customs union frontier, which will traverse the island of Ireland, is to be enforced, policed, or ignored? What is your understanding? Please tell us.
Jack Eamon Ryan.
Taoiseach, I think we're just talking later on this issue, but I might give the same advice I'd given a private meeting now publicly, in terms I think we should hold our position with regard to the backstop. And in relation to our discussions with the German government, and that, or indeed any other governments, can I suggest this argument? It isn't just protecting an Irish position. What Prime Minister May seems to be clearly aligning herself now with the ERG and the DUP, the very hard Brexiteers within her parliament. Effectively, she's aligning with a position that wants to deregulate, wants to create UK as a kind of Singapore of the Northwest Europe. And it's not in the German or anyone's interest to do that. They'll use the Irish, if they can remove the Irish backstop. I think they think it's also removed the regulatory alignment measures that are contained within the withdrawal agreement. So for that reason, for a German government as much as an Irish government, it's important we hold the line that they don't dumb down on labour and environment regulatory standards, which is what they want to do, and we should hold fast and firm, not just for Ireland, but for all of Europe in that regard.
And finally, Deputy Micheál Martin.
I did ask the Taoiseach last week whether he spoke to the President of the Commission in relation to a no-deal scenario and as to the border question. I didn't get a reply at the time, but I think it's important to make the point all round that a no-deal Brexit is a disaster for all concerned, not just Ireland, but for the United Kingdom, and indeed it's bad for the European Union as well. So let's keep that in perspective as we discuss this. I think the Commission spokesman today, and indeed the Taoiseach for the first time, has been a bit more frank than normal in terms of what a no-deal means in terms of a border in Ireland. We can refuse to cooperate with the European Union, which was what I took from the Taoiseach's earlier comments some months ago, that we're simply not planning for a border, we're not going to put up a border. How long that will last, I'm not quite sure. But I think the discussion with Chancellor Merkel, which lasted 40 minutes, I don't think we got the full story on that. We may have to wait for the 30-year rule in terms of what exactly was discussed. Because I don't think it took 40 minutes for the Chancellor to say to the Taoiseach that nothing has changed and nothing will change. So, and we do know that Chancellor Merkel's hallmarks as a politician, one of them is her capacity to be constructive, creative, to seek ways around roadblocks. And can you tell us, Taoiseach, is she proposing, is she thinking any new ways of overcoming the refusal of the United Kingdom Parliament to ratify the withdrawal treaty in its current form. It was suggested to Financial Times in recent days that one of the issues identified in your conversation is that you may be personally concerned about how any change would reflect on you. I presume we can take it from you that that's not the case. I don't think there's any question mark over German solidarity with Ireland. Equally, there's no doubt that Germany has, with other countries, asked what Ireland is willing to agree to help achieve ratification of the withdrawal treaty. So clearly, the Commission spokesman today chose today to issue his clarifying statement. I think there is time yet to go on this, and I think that's an important factor as well as we assess this. But I think clarity is important.
4 minutes.
Thanks very much. The phone call with Chancellor Merkel was very much an opportunity to talk through what might happen in different scenarios, to try and work out what might happen next and what we could do in different scenarios. And it was a very good and useful conversation in that sense, and one that we've had more than once, and I think we'll have again, no doubt. We didn't have any detailed discussion on extending Article 50, but we're all aware that that is an option. But ultimately, that request would have to come from the United Kingdom. And I've no doubt that any request from them would be considered. I think in terms of conversations about Brexit, one thing that I can say about Germany and German politicians is they understand borders and hard borders and partition in a way that perhaps very few other people in the European Union do. And they understand what an enormous challenge and threat Brexit is to Ireland and to all that's been achieved in the past 20 years. I've always said, and I've been saying it for months now, if not years, that we can't avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland simply through words and promises and good intentions. It does require a legally operable and legally binding agreement that aligns customs rules and market regulations. That's what the backstop is. It's exactly that. An alignment of customs rules and an alignment of single market regulations, so there doesn't have to be a border, no physical infrastructure, no associated checks or controls. And despite what others may say, there is no other proposal on the table at the moment that does that. Not one. People who are opposed to the backstop and at the same time say that they don't want a hard border on the island of Ireland, the best they can come up with is a promise that will never happen or a promise that you will sort it out over the next 2 years. And that's not acceptable. The Irish government, and I don't think anyone in this House, can accept that. The backstop is a legally operable mechanism to avoid a hard border by aligning customs and regulations. And nothing else is being proposed by anyone else that does that, other than the promise to come up with something in a year or 2 or 3. And that's not something that the government can accept. And that's why we have to hold so firmly to our position on the backstop. In terms of what would happen in a no-deal scenario, it's always a difficult thing to speculate about. If we end up in a few weeks' time in a scenario where the United Kingdom leaves the European Union without a deal, then we have a real dilemma because in Ireland we're part of the European Union and we'll have obligations to protect the single market. The United Kingdom will have joined the World Trade Organization. They'll have obligations to implement WTO rules. And both the UK and Ireland will have an obligation to honour the Good Friday Agreement, protect the peace process and honour our commitment to the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland that there won't be a hard border. So what would we have to do in that scenario? We'd have to negotiate an agreement on customs and regulations that meant full alignment, so there would be no hard border. We already have that agreement, and that is the backstop. So nobody who's opposed to the backstop can credibly say that they are also against a hard border, unless they can come up with something else that aligns customs and aligns regulations and allows a border to be avoided. And nobody else has done that yet. There's a reason why it took 1.5 years or 2 years to negotiate this backstop, because it's hard to do. And we've done that. And we can't give that up in return for a promise that will be all right on the night or a commitment just to sort it out over the next 2 years. It took us 18 months to sort it out. We have a proposal, it does work, and we have to stand by it.
We now move on.